Silas Kettering almost didn't see her at all. The snow was coming sideways across Route 14 outside Cedarholm, North Dakota. Hard enough that Silas had slowed his truck to a crawl just to keep the road's edge in sight. When a shape huddled against a guardrail caught the corner of his headlights. Small, still, and covered in enough snow that another minute of driving past might have meant he never saw her. Della Hartman was 8 years old and had been sitting against that guardrail for over 40 minutes, her lips gone the color of the storm around her. Too cold to call out anymore by the time Silas got his door open and half ran through the drifts to reach her. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" Silas asked, already wrapping her in his own coat. Della's eyes opened, slow and unfocused, and the first thing she said, through lips that could barely form the words, wasn't about herself at all. "My mom," Della whispered. "She went to find help. She's still out there." What happened over the following 6 hours would end with 937 motorcycles lining Route 14 at dawn. Heads bowed in a silence that stretched the length of the highway, honoring a search that had asked more of an entire community than any of them had expected a single winter night to demand. Cedarholm sat in the flat prairie country of central North Dakota, a town of grain elevators and long winters, and Silas Kettering was 67 years old, a grandfather of 6, and had ridden with the Iron Vow for over 30 years, though on a night like that one, his truck rather than his bike was the only sensible way to move through a storm the Weather Service had been warning about for 2 days straight. He'd been driving home from his son's house when he spotted Della, and would later say, more than once, that 30 years of riding had taught him to notice things at the edge of his vision that most people's instincts trained them to miss. Before we get any further, if this is your first time here, hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because the next 6 hours weren't only about finding one frightened girl in a blizzard. They were about an entire community deciding that finding her mother mattered exactly as much, no matter how bad the storm got before morning. Now, back 3 days, to the breakdown that started this family's night in the snow. Cassie Hartman and her daughter Della had been living out of their car for 6 weeks, ever since a layoff and a rent increase arrived close enough together that the math stopped working in their favor. Cassie had kept it together as best she could, a system of thermoses and blankets, a rotation of truck stops and rest areas where nobody asked too many questions, a daily promise to Della that this was temporary, that she was working on it, that they'd have a real door to close behind them again soon. 3 nights before Silas found Della, their car had died on Route 14 during the storm's first hours, the engine finally giving out after months of Cassie postponing repairs she couldn't afford. Cell service on that stretch of highway was unreliable at best, and Cassie, watching the storm worsen and knowing they couldn't survive the night sitting in a car with a dead battery and a failing heater, had made the decision that had haunted every hour since. She'd bundled Della in every blanket they owned, tell her to stay put no matter what, and walk the 1.5 miles to a gas station she remembered passing to call for help. She never made it back. Della had waited exactly as long as her mother told her to, watching the car's windows frost over from the inside, the cold eventually becoming something she couldn't out stubborn no matter how much she wanted to keep the promise. She'd left the car sometime after the 2nd hour, following the road in the direction her mother had gone, and had made it perhaps half a mile before the guardrail became the only thing keeping her upright. Silas got her into his truck's heated cab, called 911 immediately, and relayed everything Della could manage to tell him through violent shivering. Her mother's description, the direction she'd walked, how long ago she'd left. The dispatcher confirmed what Silas already feared. No one matching Cassie's description had been found yet, and with the storm still active, search efforts on foot were dangerous enough that official resources were stretched thin across a county already handling multiple weather-related emergencies. Silas made the call that mattered most within minutes of getting that information. 4 words to the Iron Vow's regional phone tree that needed no further explanation among people who understood exactly what a missing mother in a blizzard meant. Woman missing. Needs searchers. Word moved through the chapter and 3 neighboring ones with a speed that defied the storm itself. Riders trading their bikes for trucks, snowmobiles, and 4-wheel drive vehicles of every description. Organizing search grids along Route 14 within the hour despite conditions that would have kept most reasonable people indoors. A local search and rescue coordinator, woken by a call at midnight, arrived to find a search operation already more organized than she'd had time to build herself. Grateful for hands she hadn't expected to have available at that hour. They searched through the worst of the storm, working in short rotations to avoid frostbite themselves, calling Cassie's name into wind that swallowed most voices within 20 feet. Della, warming slowly in an ambulance with hypothermia but stable, kept asking the same question every time a paramedic checked on her. Did they find my mom yet? Nobody had an answer for the first 4 hours. It was a snowmobile team, working a drainage ditch half a mile past where Della's trail had ended, that finally found Cassie just before 5 in the morning, collapsed, but alive, having gotten turned around in the whiteout conditions and wandered considerably farther from the road than anyone had initially searched. She was unconscious, severely hypothermic, and breathing shallow enough that the paramedic who reached her first radioed for immediate evacuation rather than waiting for confirmation of anything else. Silas was standing at the command post when the radio call came through, and felt something in his chest that he'd later describe as the first full breath he'd taken in 6 hours. She's alive, he told Della, who'd been moved to a warming shelter set up in the fire station. 3 words, and Della's face went through every stage of relief a child's face can hold in under a second. By the time the ambulance carrying Cassie passed the searchers' staging area on Route 14, word had spread far enough that riders and search volunteers alike lined both shoulders of the highway to watch it pass. A gesture nobody had organized or asked for, born entirely out of the same instinct that had brought all of them out into a blizzard in the first place. Engines, first, though most had gone quiet hours earlier for the search itself, and then the sight of 937 riders and volunteers standing along both sides of Route 14 as the first gray light of dawn broke over the prairie. Vehicles parked in long, uneven lines, stretching farther than anyone could fully see through the settling snow. Every single person present bowing their head in unison as the ambulance carrying Cassie Hartman passed between them. A silence held so completely that even the wind seemed to soften for the length of the highway. Not one person there needed to be told what the moment required. They simply gave it, together, the way a community gives the only thing it has left to offer after 6 hours of searching harder than any of them had known they were capable of. Silas rode in the ambulance with Della, holding her hand the entire way to the hospital, and found himself, for the first time since he'd spotted her against that guardrail, finally letting himself feel the full weight of how close the night had come to ending differently. "You found her," Della whispered, still watching the doors that had closed between herself and her mother's stretcher. "We all did," Silas said. 3 words. "The second you told me she was still out there, everybody who could help decided that mattered as much as you did." Cassie regained consciousness 18 hours later, stable and expected to make a full recovery, and the first thing she asked, before anything else, was whether her daughter was safe. She didn't deserve to spend one more night wondering that. She never had to again. The Iron Vow's second family program moved quickly once both Hartmans were medically stable, arranging a furnished apartment, a car repair fund, and a job lead through a member who managed a local warehouse with an opening that matched Cassie's experience exactly. Cassie accepted all of it, slowly, the particular hesitation of a woman who'd spent 6 weeks learning to expect nothing and was still relearning how to expect help. Della kept the coat Silas had wrapped her in that first night, oversized and worn thin at the elbows, refusing every offer of a replacement because, she said, it still smelled like the truck cab that had been the first warm place she'd felt safe in for longer than she wanted to remember. Silas visits the Hartmans most Sundays now, the way a grandfather checks in on family he didn't know he had until a blizzard put them directly in his path. And Della calls him exactly that, without any of the adults around her ever having to suggest the word first. If this story reached you, if you believe that a community's willingness to search through the worst conditions imaginable says everything about who its people really are, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs reminding that 937 strangers once stood in a blizzard for two people most of them had never met. Subscribe to Iron Vow Stories so you never miss the next one. And tell me in the comments, how far would you have searched that night?